Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moment. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Martial Universe Season 7 Part 10 based on novel. So let's start. A faint light film covered the place, encompassing the 4 large stone tablets within it. A deathly silent atmosphere circulated within the light film, causing one to have some difficulties breathing. However, at this moment, there were 2 people within the light film. One was training while the other was a blind old man, who was already used to it. Hence, the pressuring atmosphere within this place did not cause the 2 of them to feel any discomfort. The blind old man was hugging a somewhat old and damaged broom. His grayish-white eyes that were without any pupils were lowered slightly. Even his breathing had become weak and inaudible at this moment. At a cursory glance, he appeared no different from a sick old man who was about to die. Kai? After this silence continued for around half a day, Lindong, who was sat in front of a stone tablet a short distance away, suddenly trembled. There was actually a weak light being scattered from the surface of the black stone tablet. The moment the light scattered from the stone tablet, the blind old man, who had his eyes lowered, suddenly raised his head. His body moved before he strangely appeared in front of Lindong, even though he hardly moved. After which, his expression turned a little solemn as he stared at Lindong's face. At this moment, there was a vague dark greyish color lingering over Lindong's youthful face. Moreover, this greyish color was gathering towards the spot between Lindong's eyebrows. An extremely slight greyish line had actually appeared on Lindong's forehead. That greyish line had an undefined form. It appeared to be connected to Lindong's skin, appearing just like a worm when it wiggled. He has met Huang already, huh? The blind old man's eyes were focused intensely on Lindong's face. His elderly face tensed up while his shriveled fingers could not help but rub against each other. Clearly, there was quite a big ripple on his calm old well-esque emotions. Under the observation of the blind old man, the greyish aura on Lindong's face became increasingly dense. 2 traces of blood suddenly flowed from the corner of Lindong's eyes when the greyish aura became dense. They were just like 2 blood tears and they looked extremely startling. Crack! Although the blind old man had lost his sight, he was still able to clearly observe this scene. His expression immediately changed drastically before the broom in his hand was directly crushed into powder. Having once practiced the desolate demon eye, he was clearly aware that practicing this martial art possessed some risk. It was extremely easy for that strange energy to seep into one's eyes. Moreover, should one's eyes be eroded by that energy, one would end up becoming just like him. The blind old man's face was extremely tense. His shriveled hand continued to tighten and relax. It was as if he was hesitating if he should drag Lindong out from the mental realm at this moment. Kai? During the time that the blind old man hesitated, the unusual greyish chi on Lindong's face also became increasingly rich. While the greyish chi gathered, the grey line between his eyebrows also became a little thicker. At the same time, however, the blood line on the corner of Lindong's eyes also became increasingly glaring. Clearly, his eyes were already being eroded at this moment. Cluck cluck. The blind old man took tiny and chaotic steps back and forth in front of Lindong. This continued for a couple of minutes before he violently clenched his teeth. He turned around and his shriveled hand pierced towards the grey line between Lindong's eyebrows like a sharp sword with lightning-like speed. As long as this thing was broken, it would be possible to awaken Lindong. The blind old man was extremely quick and it seemed as if his finger could penetrate through space. In just a flash, his fingers had already arrived in front of Lindong's forehead. However, just as he was about to pierce downwards, a warm white light suddenly rushed out from between Lindong's eyebrows and collided with his finger. Clang! The 2 collided but no energy ripple erupted from it. That white light merely blocked the blind old man's fingers for an instant before it disappeared. Although the white light disappeared, the blind old man's fingers were also stopped. A surprised expression was clearly present on his face. There is no need for me to intervene, huh? The blind old man was quiet for a moment. He could only attribute the white light to something Lindong had unleashed subconsciously. If that was the case, it seemed like Lindong did not want to give up on learning the desolate demon eye. After receiving this information from Lindong, the frown on the blind old man's face appeared to be even denser. He stood on the spot for quite a while before shaking his head somewhat helplessly. He seemed to have underestimated Lindong's persistence when it came to learning martial arts. However, at times, persistence may or may not be a good thing. In that case, let's wait a little longer. If things really go wrong, I will forcefully drag you out. Truly a fellow who does not allow others to have a peaceful mind, the blind old man muttered to himself. After which, he sat down beside Lindong and continued to carefully observe him. As he continued to observe, the blind old man gradually relaxed. Although the blood trace on the corner of Lindong's eyes continued to flow, fortunately, it showed no sign of intensifying. This so-called wait directly lasted for 5 days. Lindong did not show any signs of leaving his training during these 5 days. The blood tears that had flowed out from the corner of his eyes had already hardened into 2 blood clots, causing him to look exceptionally strange. During this period of time, the greyish qi on Lindong's face also became increasingly dense and there were no signs of it weakening. However, this also caused the blind old man, who was observing Lindong, to feel uncertain. Although the greyish line between Lindong's eyebrows was continuously gathering greyish qi, there was not the slightest further activity being emitted. Based on the old man's experience, the greyish line should gradually show signs of turning into an eye if Lindong succeeded. However, if he failed, Lindong would not be this calm. Therefore, even someone as experienced as him was a little confused. He did not understand what level Lindong's training was currently at. This manner that neither appeared like success nor failure really caused him to feel helpless. It has already been 5 days. Time is more or less up. It seems like this little fellow will need to battle with that brat Jian Hao in the Desolate Hall monthly competition today. It is merely a competition between the younger generation members. Training is more important. Forget about it, just let him train. If he misses it, then so be it. The blind old man muttered to himself. However, from his mannerism, it was clear that he did not wish for Lindong's training to be interrupted because of the latter's match with Jian Hao. Hence, he did not show any signs that he was going to wake Lindong up. Buzz buzz. However, everything in this world always surprises people. Soon after the mutterings of the blind old man sounded out, a buzzing sound was suddenly emitted from the stone tablet. After which, he saw the black eye on the stone tablet suddenly shooting out a bright grey light. That light shot onto the spot between Lindong's eyebrows and coincided with the grey line. The ray of light linked the spot between Lindong's eyebrows and the stone tablet. The skin on that spot also began to wiggle. That grey line became increasingly obvious and it actually vaguely began to show signs of opening. A dark, cold and evil aura, which caused one great discomfort, was vaguely emitted from it. Is it about to transform into an eye? The blind old man's body immediately straightened when he saw this scene. He stared intently at Lindong's brows. However, under his observation, the grey line ultimately did not show any signs of splitting apart despite its wiggling continuously. What is going on? The blind old man frowned tightly and softly asked. While he was knitted his brows, the blind old man did not observe a warm white glow under the greyish light that could not be detected. The light that was connected to Lindong's brows gradually weakened. A moment later, it finally emitted a kite sound and completely disappeared. Just when the light disappeared, Lindong's eyes, which had been shut for 5 days, finally slowly opened up at this moment. His ajar eyes were as clear and calm as they were 5 days ago. Although the blood clot at the corner of his eyes was a little strange to look at, the current Lindong did not appear any different from 5 days ago. The blind old man was a little stunned as he looked at Lindong's calm expression when he opened his eyes. He was lost for words at that moment. Thank you, Elder, for protecting me during my training. A smile swiftly surfaced on Lindong's face. He stood up, bowed to the blind old man and said, "It's nothing. If you have finished training, you should leave. Today is the Desolate Hall monthly competition." The blind old man slowly stood up, waved his hand and said. Lindong nodded. He did not say any unnecessary words as he turned around and left. When he was just about to walk out of the light film, the blind old man finally could not resist asking, "Although I do not know whether you have successfully learnt it, you should try to use the desolate demon eye as little as possible in the future. This martial art is a little unorthodox and it will hurt your eyes if you use it too many times." Lindong's footsteps paused. He immediately rubbed the spot between his eyebrows with his hand. The corner of his lips was lifted into a slight arc. He had similarly sensed some of the darker aspects of desolate demon eye while he was training. However, it was likely that this thing would not be able to stir much trouble with the mysterious stone talisman suppressing it. Within the mountain range that the desolate hall was located in, there was an especially vast and tall mountain peak. This mountain peak pierced through the clouds, which tumbles and twists around it, giving it an out-of-world feeling. This mountain peak was the location of the desolate hall's main hall. It could be counted as the head of the various halls within the desolate hall. The monthly competition was also held on this mountaintop. The monthly competition was the most customary event held within Dao sect and the four halls. This goal of this customary event was to observe the training progress of the disciples and use this event to stimulate their disciples' desire to train, which would increase the overall strength of the halls. Furthermore, in every monthly competition, there will be a few branch disciples who will be promoted to become full-fledged disciples due to their stellar performance. Therefore, even though this competition was held every month, this day was still the most lively day every month. That was because this was the only day whereby those branch disciples had the chance to be promoted to the main hall. Within the desolate hall, the number of branch disciples ranges in the tens of thousands. As for the full-fledged disciples, there were 3,000 of them and there were 300 direct disciples. This could be said to be a humongous lineup. Within a day, there will be an overwhelming majority of them gathered here. Thus, the commotion caused by such an event would naturally not be trivial. At the highest spot on the mountain peak, stood a quiet and large ancient hall that pierced through the clouds. A majestic aura was being emitted from it. Meanwhile, its yellowish color was the mark left behind by time, demonstrating that it had withstood the test of time. In front of this great hall was an extremely vast green stadium, which gave off a strong feeling of stratification and order. At this moment, it was already packed densely with mountains of people. Although the vast stadium was filled with countless individuals, there was not a single scuffle. Over 10,000 disciples sat quietly in the stadium. The solemn air that filled the atmosphere even caused fluctuations in the surrounding natural yuan power. Near the center of the stadium was where the full-fledged disciples sat today. A few of the branch disciples were looking at them. Brimming within their eyes were envy and admiration. The purpose of their hard work was for the dream to one day become a full-fledged disciple of the desolate hall. Looking further beyond to the center of the stadium, there was a series of tall erected platforms. Seated on them were a few hundred people dressed in yellow clothes. Every one of them was emitting wave after wave of frightening yuan power fluctuations. Those were the direct disciples, the true elite of the desolate hall. If the gazes of the branch disciples were filled with envy and admiration, the gazes directed towards the direct disciples were also filled with a trace of respect. All of them were clearly aware that becoming a direct disciple was a mark of power and strength. However, what caught the eye of most people in the stadium was not the direct disciples. Instead, it was the four wide and tall platforms situated at the center of the stadium. On those four platforms sat four different people. Their status and position were higher than any disciple in the desolate hall. Their status and position was something that anyone would know of, and there was no one who would doubt their capabilities. That was because the four of them were the four senior direct disciples of the desolate hall. In other words, they were the most outstanding existences amongst all the disciples in the desolate hall. On the opposite side of the stadium was a stone table and a row of stone chairs. Seated there was Chen, Wu Dao, and a few other protectors of the desolate hall. They were currently observing the scene before them. According to the information that we received, there are hundreds of branch disciples this time around that have the qualifications to become full-fledged disciples, announced Wu Dao as his gaze swept across the whole stadium. After hearing that statement, Chen faintly nodded his head. This number was much better than the statistics from the past few months. It seems like those little fellows at the bottom had trained quite hard this past couple of months. Lindong still hasn't appeared, asked Chen Zhen suddenly. Yes, replied Wu Dao as he continued speaking while smiling. He should be in a critical phase of his training. Senior brother Mo is quite interested in him and he should be keeping a close eye on him. If he can't make it on time, postpone the challenge match for 1 month as training is more important, said Chen Zhen while smiling. He did not wish for Lindong to appear now. Based on Lindong's talent, his chances of victory even against Jian Hao would increase quite a bit if he was to train for 1 more month. News has already spread and even some branch disciples have heard about Lindong. They all want to witness the superhuman genius that dared to challenge one of the 4 senior direct disciples after entering the desolate hall for less than a month, said Wu Dao helplessly. Furthermore, based on Lindong's character, I'm afraid that he will never back down. His character is truly similar to senior brother Ju Tong. Else, he would not have charged up to Yuan Gate alone. After thinking about it, I believe that even Lord Sect Master would have protected him if he stayed in Dao Sect. But Yuan Gate, that damned thing, vented Chen Zhen before deeply sighing. When he mentioned this incident, even a person of his status could not help but curse. Wu Dao turned solemn and his face turned quite gloomy. One could tell how bitter he was about Ju Tong and the Yuan Gate incident. That's enough, let's not talk about it. Let's wait a while longer. After Chen Zhen saw the expression on Wu Dao's face, he secretly shook his head. If senior Ju Tong was still around now, based on his past results, there was a good chance that he could rival those old codgers in the sect. Regretfully, the sect master of Yuan Gate personally took action, and perhaps, he detected the threat that Ju Tong would become in the future, should he be given enough time to grow. While Chen Zhen and Wu Dao were conversing, a slight commotion had appeared because of the delay in the monthly competition. On top of a stone platform, Jian Hao was casually observing the mountainous amount of people in the stadium. Promptly, he furrowed his eyebrows. It is rumored that Lindong had submerged himself in the martial arts hall for 5 days already. Was he planning to use that as an excuse to avoid today's match? Ha ha, senior brother Jian Hao. Looks like the challenge match today might have fizzled out, Fang Yun grinned when he saw this sight. He stretched his back casually before teasing Jian Hao. If that is the case, his previous showcase of arrogance is truly a joke, replied Jian Hao calmly and casually. Lindong has just entered our desolate hall. Even if you defeat him, it would not be anything glamorous. Furthermore, he is our junior brother, said Pang Tong while frowning. He was the one with the greatest qualifications amongst the 4 senior direct disciples. I didn't mean to cause trouble for him. However, there are times when respecting a senior brother is still required, right? If this doesn't happen, in the future, members of our desolate hall will be mocked by those from the other halls for not knowing how to respect one's seniors, replied Jian Hao after curling his lip. It is all right to let him suffer a little to restrain his arrogant disposition. However, you have to remember that senior Uncle Chen Zhen and the others highly value Lindong, added Song Ju while smiling. I will exercise discretion. Since he was able to endure the Pill River head immersion for so long, even I have to respect him for that. However, he is still considered as a new disciple and he needs to know the rules. Since you guys are unwilling to take action, it's down to me, said Jian Hao casually. Song Ju smiled once again and only nodded his head without saying anything else. However, the unexpected delay had added an extra tinge of anticipation. Song Ju was curious to see what kind of incredible performance that junior brother, who had rushed up with an irresistible force since his entry into Desolate Hall, would have against one of the 4 senior direct disciples, Jian Hao. Would he be beaten till his arrogant spirit was replaced with despair, or would he perform another miracle once again? As all the disciples quietly awaited, time slowly passed. However, the commotion in the stadium was gradually getting more intense as time passed. Seeing this, both Chen Zhen and Wu Dao frowned. However, they did not prevent this. Instead, their eyes irresistibly moved towards the mountain peak where the martial arts hall was situated. It's time, but why hasn't that fellow Lindong appeared? At a corner within the location of the direct disciples, Mo Ling and the others were getting slightly worried. Their gazes continuously scanned all directions. They clearly knew that news regarding the match between Lindong and Jian Hao had spread far and wide during these few days. If Lindong did not show up, he might become the target for ridicule and mockery. Lindong went to the martial arts hall and is most likely delayed because he is learning a new martial art, Liu Bai said solemnly. He looked towards the crowd helplessly and said, "Just wait a while longer." Panicking would not solve the problem. Furthermore, it may be a good thing to postpone this fight. After all, Lindong's opponent is one of the 4 senior direct disciples. From the way he phrased his words, it was obvious that he was not favoring Lindong's odds for this challenge match. Although he had quite a lot of confidence in Lindong, regardless, Jian Hao was not someone that Tong Chuan could be compared with. After hearing his words, the group could only nod their heads and suppress the anxiety in their hearts, as they eagerly waited for the arrival of Lindong. The burning sun above the sky started to reach the midpoint position. Seeing this, Chen Zhen and Wu Dao could only helplessly shake their heads. Seems like Lindong was truly engrossed in his training. Let the other disciples begin first. Chen Zhen waved his hand before a protector of the desolate hall slowly walked out. His eyes swept across the entire stadium before he proceeded to announce the start of the monthly competition. Upon seeing his appearance and announcement, a disappointed hiss could be heard ringing across the entire stadium. Swoosh! However, just as this disappointed hiss started to decline, the sound of air shattering suddenly resounded out from the sky far away. A familiar aura could be felt spreading out from there. Has he finally arrived? He did not disappoint me in the end. Jian Hao raised his head and looked towards a distant spot in the sky. A chuckle appeared on his face. The sound of air shattering rapidly resounded in the sky. On the top of the mountain peak, every single pair of eyes started to shift due to this whooshing sound, before carrying some excitement as they turned towards the direction where the whooshing sound came from. Has he finally arrived? Under the tens of thousands of earnest gazes, the whooshing sound increased violently. After a few breaths, a human figure appeared in front of everyone. Swish! The person traveled through the air before landing in the middle of the stadium under the gazes of everyone present. The person faced the opposite side of the stadium before he cupped his hands towards Chen Zhen and Wu Dao. With a slightly apologetic voice, he said, "Disciple is late." "Ha ha, it's fine now that you are here." Chen Zhen smiled before stroking his beard with his hands, while his eyes scanned across Lindong's body. However, he did not manage to discover any differences even after these past 5 days. Jian Hao slowly stood up from the tall platform before he glared at Lindong. "Junior brother Lindong, I almost assumed that you were planning to run away from today's fight," he said with a smile. "Lindong wouldn't dare to forget about senior brother's challenge, right?" said Lindong softly after giving a faint smile. "Ha ha, you're bold." Jian Hao gave a loud laugh before tapping the platform with his foot. He shot forward like an eagle and appeared directly in front of Lindong. Waving his large sleeves, a yuan power fluctuation that seemingly encompassed the sky erupted out. This caused exclaimed expressions to appear on the faces of quite a few disciples. Feeling the oppression caused by the yuan power billowing out of Jian Hao's body, a smile appeared on Lindong's face. 7 yuan nirvana stage is powerful indeed. At this moment, there were quite a few pairs of eyes staring on Lindong ever since his appearance. This was obviously due to the massive fame that was attached to his name. Even the disciples from the 3 other halls knew about this top-tier individual called Lindong. However, not many of them had actually seen him in the flesh. Furthermore, there was an enormous number of Desolate Hall branch disciples present today. That person is senior brother Lindong? I heard that he actually dared to challenge a senior direct disciple like Jian Hao after entering the Desolate Hall for less than a month. Heh, what do you know? It's said that senior brother Lindong was the champion of the 100 Empire War. Furthermore, he even rejected Yuan Gate's invitation and instead chose to join our Dao sect. Hence, he is not someone that can be compared with any ordinary direct disciple. 100 Empire War champion? That truly is incredible. The past few champions have always been monopolized by Yuan Gate. However, senior brother Jian Hao is unlike those opponents in the 100 Empire War. I'm afraid senior brother Lindong will hit a wall today. Haha, senior brother Lindong is quite handsome. I hope that he can win. You're lovesick. Soft discussion sounds could be heard continuously ringing around in the stadium. Over tens of thousands of branch disciples were staring intently at Lindong. Amongst them, there were quite a few young and beautiful female disciples as well. As such, amongst the gossips, there was quite a few witty remarks and laughter mixed in too. This caused the environment of the place to grow quite lively. Hearing the discussion noises coming from the surroundings, Lindong could not resist and gave a faint smile. Only after lightly scanning with his eyes, did he realize the enormous number of disciples. He clicked his tongue. This is the disciple foundation of the desolate hall? It is quite valiant indeed. He could sense that even the branch disciples had all advanced into Nirvana stage. This meant that there were over tens of thousands of Nirvana stage experts just within the desolate hall. Including the 3 other halls, the total amount would be worthy of a super sect lineage, thought Lindong. Lindong involuntarily felt shocked in his heart. He finally understood why the super sects were the true overlords of the Eastern Xian region. This strength was something that an empire alone could never compare with. Take for example his Great Jian Empire, a Nirvana stage expert would be considered as an elite individual there. However, if he was placed within the Dao sect, he would barely qualify to become a branch disciple. Jian Hao did a lazy stretch, faced Chenzhen and Wu Dao and said with a smile, "Senior Uncle Chenzhen, since junior brother Lindong has already arrived, can we begin the fight? There are many disciples behind waiting for the chance to get promoted." After hearing his words, Chenzhen nodded his head before looking towards Lindong and Jian Hao. He said in a deep voice, "We do not forbid disciples within the desolate hall to spar with each other. However, I want the 2 of you to be very clear that this is merely a spar. This is the Dao sect and both of you are fellow disciples, not bitter enemies. Yes?" After hearing Chenzhen's stern warning, both Lindong and Jian Hao did not dare to neglect as they respectfully replied. When he saw their actions, Chenzhen nodded his head in satisfaction. With a wave of his hand, he said, "In that case, I shall declare that the monthly competition has begun. Lindong, if you are able to spar evenly with Jian Hao, you will gain the qualifications to become the 5th senior direct disciple. Furthermore, you will also become the fastest person in the history of Desolate Hall to become a senior direct disciple. Disciple will do his best." Lindong replied and nodded his head. Slowly turning his body to face Jian Hao, he lightly saluted and said, "Senior brother Jian Hao, please guide me." Following the appearance of Lindong's words, the whispering sounds present within the arena instantly disappeared. Tens of thousands of gazes stared intently at the center of the arena. This stifling atmosphere caused some people to be unable to catch their breath. You want to become the 5th senior direct disciple. However, it's not going to be so easy to pass through me, said Jian Hao casually as he stared at Lindong. Lindong curled his lip and replied in a soft voice with a smile on his face, "In that case, the only thing I can is to defeat you, senior brother. This wouldn't happen just by words alone." Jian Hao gave a casual smile before his vision instantly became swift and fierce. He took a step forward before boundless Yuan power erupted from his body without restraint. He had already decided to unleash his maximum strength. After all, he wanted to defeat Lindong with a lightning-like speed in order to let him clearly understand that the current him still does not possess the qualifications to become a senior direct disciple. Huff. Sensing the swift and fierce oppression coming from Jian Hao, a trace of seriousness appeared on Lindong's vision before he took in a deep breath. Jian Hao was one of the senior direct disciples in Desolate Hall and his combat prowess and strength must not be underestimated. Upon entering the challenge, Jian Hao's face turned into one of cold indifference. He also had no intention of warming up first. Instead, with a grasp of his hand, boundless Yuan power condensed with lightning-like speed in his palm. Finally, it turned into an 11-feet-long golden-colored saber. An astonishingly swift and fierce fluctuation was emitted by it. Roar! After materializing his saber, Jian Hao suddenly took a step forward. A remnant shade was left at his original position. However, his body morphed into a ray of light and soared towards Lindong with a frightening speed. Swish! Jian Hao's speed was frightening. In a blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Lindong. With a cold gaze, his golden blade sliced through space. Carrying a frightening amount of chilliness, he hacked at Lindong with a lightning-like speed. Before the blade glow could descend, the swift and fierce chi from it had already left deep marks on the ground. Ding! Facing the lightning quick offensive launched by Jian Hao, Lindong suddenly flipped his palm. Instantly, a black metal seal flashed and appeared, causing winds to violent rage as it morphed into an enormous iron symbol. It violently slammed against that golden glow, causing sparks to erupt before a metallic sound resounded throughout the air. Violent winds erupted from the center of the stadium. Jian Hao's body trembled as he quickly retreated several steps. However, it was obvious that his combat experience was extremely rich. While he retreated, a blade glow instantly erupted forth before it transformed into a dozen overglowing afterimages and viciously slammed against the black metal seal. Bang! Due to the violent blade glows, the black metal seal was directly shaken and smashed away. However, before the metal seal flew off, a person appeared before it in a flash. Green light started to appear on his arms, before instantly morphing into Green Dragon's gigantic arm. Dong! Lindong's Green Dragon arm heavily pressed against the black metal seal. Fearful strength erupted from the arm and directly shook and dissipated the frightening blade afterimages. After which, he clenched his hand tightly into a fist and slammed it viciously against the iron seal. Clang! The black iron seal was directly blown away by Lindong's fist. It was just like a black meteorite as it charged towards Jian Hao, with an incomparably wild and violent strength. Looking at the metal seal approaching him like a meteorite, the cold glint within Jian Hao's eye grew even colder. Radiant golden light crazily gathered on his fist, causing a boundless fluctuation to spread out before he also launched a fist and smashed against the iron seal. Boom! The enormous metal seal was once again smashed and rebounded by his fist. Despite its massive size, it was just like a toy that was being flung around by Lindong and Jian Hao. Seeing this play out, it caused the eyes of quite a few people to flutter. Lindong moved his body and once again appeared on top of the black metal seal. His eyes were locked on Jian Hao, who was standing in the stadium. Within his eyes, one could feel the excitement within his body beginning to boil. "Since you want to fight, let's have a good fight," Lindong exclaimed as the corners of his mouth cracked open. His other hand started to wriggle about, before morphing into another ferocious-looking green dragon arm in front of the shocked audience. "You are skilled indeed." Within the stadium, Jian Hao grasped the golden-colored saber in his hand and stood proudly. His fiery gaze was locked onto Lindong, who was stepping on the metal seal hovering in midair. He took a deep breath before a formidable fluctuation gradually started to surface from within his body. When this fluctuation appeared, the ground around Jian Hao started to wither at a frightening rate. Desolate force. Quite a few gazes of the disciples started to focus at this instant. Jian Hao was about to use desolate force. This was the special energy that was solely possessed by the Desolate Hall disciples. This video will end here.